Hey everybody, my name is Casey Haithcock, and I'm in Intro to Great Commission Studies, like the rest of you. So this is definitely late. No excuses for that, but it is late. But I did want to fulfill the requirements of the course in doing this video for the missionary that I studied this semester. So I read To the Golden Shore by Courtney Anderson, and it's basically a very long story in telling the story of Adoniram Judson. Um, so I'll tell you where this really stuck out to me as far as a missionary that I wanted to study more. In 2015, I started at Fruitland Baptist Bible College in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And in our class were 5 Burmese students. And they were refugees from Burma, and they were pursuing a theological education with hopes of taking the gospel back to the nation. I guess it's technically Myanmar or Burma. So so ever since that, I've been fascinated by that. And then when I first heard the story of Adoniram Judson in a David Platt sermon, I've been fascinated with that story because I felt like the dots really connected in my life as far as knowing them and then learning about Judson. So if you don't know who Adoniram Judson was, he was a missionary to Burma, the first to really ever go and have any kind of success in Burma. In 1812, he and his wife Anne were commissioned to be missionaries to the unreached. Um, and one of the very shocking first parts of his story is his letter to Anne's father, basically asking if he'll consent to their marriage. And basically, long story short, in it, you can look it up. It'll probably come up on the first result when you search it on Google. But essentially, he asks if her father will consent to never seeing her again, to allowing her to be tormented by the life of a missionary in a tropical climate in a place where there's great hostility to the gospel. Long story short, it's probably not the best letter to write to the father of someone you're wanting to marry. But he did. And the reason he did that was because he wanted to be transparent with Anne's father about what they would face. They ultimately say yes. Her father ultimately says yes, and they embark to India. It was a 114-day journey from Boston, Massachusetts to India. But anyways, they get there, they get baptized. A long story short, along the way, they find out that they want to be Baptist because of the doctrine of baptism. And so they deconvert from their congregational convictions and align under the Baptist denomination. William Carey actually is the one that baptized them. But they had desires to go to Burma. And even William Carey himself, when they expressed their desire to go to Burma, he greatly discouraged it. Anyone that had gone to Burma had either died or had come back and said, it's too hostile there, we can't go. And so, but Adoniram and Anne were determined to get to Burma. And so after they're in Burma for almost 7 years, they see their first convert. Almost 7 years after they left the United States is when they see their first convert. Before that, they had lost 2 children. One was born dead, and then the other child lived for about 6 months before he got sick and passed away. And in 1819, they started the First Baptist Zayat in Burma, in Rangoon, where they were. And a Zayat was essentially small shelters on the side of the road where Buddhist teachers would disseminate Buddhist teachings. And so they said, well, let's do that, but we'll disseminate discern the teachings of Christ. And so they do that. And I thought it was funny. According to Adoniram, their first service at the First Baptist Zayat in 1819 was 15 adults and a bunch of naked children smoking cigars. So I thought that was kind of funny. Not any semblance of anything as we know of a church today. Long story short, he does have a long story, and I'm trying to make this somewhat concise. He ends up losing his wife, Anne. She passes away. He actually finds that out while he's been imprisoned for simply just being a foreigner. It was during the time that the British invaded Burma, so any white people of influence in Burma were suspected to be spies. But he finds out that his wife Anne has passed away. And he also finds out that, and actually just days after he gets out, he finds out that his daughter Maria has passed away. And I actually misquoted that. This was not when he was in prison. He was already out of prison. This was when he was away doing ministry. So anyways, but Adoniram throws himself back into ministry, and about 6 to 7 years later, he marries Sarah Boardman. And it was Sarah that gave him 8 children, 6 of which survived into adulthood. And so they had a bunch of kids, and their ministry thrived during that time. But after the last child was born, it was very clear that Sarah was getting sick. And so they returned back to the United States. But on the journey, the ship docks at St. Helena Island in the Atlantic Ocean. And that's where Sarah dies. So they go back. Adoniram takes his children, and he begins to preach the gospel. He's actually quite famous in the States at this point because his heroic stories of being in Burma had spread to the United States. And every time he would preach, it was unique because he would often leave his listeners disappointed because he wouldn't talk about stories of him in Burma. He would simply just preach the gospel because that's the greatest story ever told. And he was actually disturbed when people were disappointed because they wanted to hear the stories of Burma. And he's like, I just want to tell you about Jesus. Not too long after that, he meets or he hears of an author named Fanny Forrester. Her real name was Emily Chubbuck, but that name didn't sell a lot of books. The name Fanny Forrester did. So he ends up meeting her, and not too long after meeting her, they get married, and she writes the biography or some of the memoirs of Sarah. That was sort of how their relationship began. He approached her and asking if she could write the memoirs for his late wife, Sarah. And she agrees to. They go back to Burma and in 1845. And in 1850, Adoniram gets sick and he passes away. I want to read, of course, I don't have the quote here. Okay, well, I can't read that quote to you. But point being is, actually, I can read it to you right here. So right after Adoniram passes away, he was buried at sea because he had left Burma to go back to the United States in hopes to get well. But he says this. He says, and David Platt quotes this in his sermon, if you ever watched his sermon on this. But it's a prayer that Adoniram prayed earlier in his life. It says, "One prayer, my God, thy will be done. One only boon I crave, to finish well my work and rest within a Burma grave." And in thinking about the fact that he died just off the shores of Burma is pretty powerful. The fact that he prayed that God would allow him to finish his work in Burma and that he would be laid to rest in Burma. And then again, I talked about this at the beginning, but this comes full circle because it's almost over 200 years later since his work originally started. 2015, I met 5 Burmese Christians, and I wholeheartedly believe if Adoniram had not gone, I don't know if they would be Christians today. I don't know who would have gone there, but it really comes full circle when you get to see the fruit of someone's efforts that lived so long ago. So, anyways, thanks for listening. I hope if you don't know about the story of Adoniram Judson, you should. It's an incredible story, inspiring story. I'm a youth pastor, and I told this story to our students a couple weeks ago, sort of as I had a baseball in my hand and I dropped it. I apologize. I told this story to our students. It's sort of a prologue to a mission series that we're doing in the month of May. And I felt like it was really powerful just being able to tell that story. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening, and have a great day.